Trust is a quiet thing. It isn't built in grand gestures or passionate declarations spoken in the heat of the moment. It's built in the silence between words, in the thousands of small unspoken moments that form the bedrock of a shared life. It is the steady, unassuming architecture that holds everything else up. It's the key you give someone to your home, yes, but it's also the key you give them to your soul, to your fears, your dreams, your most fragile, unfinished thoughts. My husband Tom held that key. I gave it to him willingly, joyfully. And the day he chose to use it, not to protect the sanctuary of my inner world, but to plunder it for his own misguided purposes, was the day I learned that a broken heart is a simple, clean injury compared to a broken trust. A heart can heal, but the foundation of trust, once it's been systematically shattered, that's a ruin you can spend a lifetime trying to navigate. The man I married was my best friend. That's a phrase so often used it has lost most of its meaning, but for us, it was the absolute truth. Tom was a high school English teacher, a gentle, intellectual man with a deep, abiding love for stories and a quiet, steadfast presence that made me feel utterly and completely safe. I am a writer. It is not just what I do, it is who I am. My life exists and makes sense within the worlds I create on the page. For most of my early adult life, my writing was a secret garden, a walled-off, intensely private place no one else was allowed to enter. My stories were too personal, too raw, too much a part of my own fragile soul to be exposed to the judgment of others. Tom was the first person I ever let through the gate. Early in our relationship, after weeks of him asking gently what I was always typing so furiously, I shyly let him read a short story I had written. I remember sitting on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white, while he sat in his favorite armchair and read the 10 pages. He read with the focused, reverent attention he usually reserved for the great poets he taught in his classes. He didn't just tell me it was good. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes full of a profound understanding, and he told me why. It was good. He understood the subtext. He saw the themes I thought were buried too deep. He loved my characters as if they were real. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not just as the woman he was falling in love with, but as the writer I was. He became my sanctuary. After we were married, our evenings took on a sacred rhythm that became the foundation of our partnership. He would sit in his armchair under the warm glow of a reading lamp, a stack of student essays beside him, and I would sit at my desk, the clicking of my keyboard a soft counterpoint to the scratching of his red pen. He was my first reader, my most trusted critic, and my fiercest champion. He held my unfinished thoughts, my half-baked ideas, my most vulnerable, unedited words, and he guarded them fiercely. He understood that a first draft is not a performance. It is a confession. The trust I had in him was absolute. It was the central pillar holding up the entire structure of our life together. For 5 years, I worked on my novel. It was the project of my life, a deeply personal story that was more exorcism than fiction. It was a semi-autobiographical exploration of my own complicated family history, a story of 3 generations of women haunted by a shared secret. It was about my grandmother's quiet resilience, my mother's bitter regrets, and my own struggle to break the cycle. Writing it was an act of excavation, of digging up painful memories and laying them bare on the page. It was the most vulnerable work I had ever done. Tom was the only other person on earth who had read a single word of it. He read every chapter. As I finished it, he helped me untangle every knot in the plot. He knew the characters, my mother, my grandmother, myself, as well as I did. The manuscript, all 400 pages of it, was our shared secret, the most sacred text in our marriage. Betrayal, when it came, was not a violent act like a slammed door or a raised voice. It was a quiet click of a mouse, an act of well-intentioned treachery that detonated my world from the inside out. Tom had a friend from his college days, a man named Richard, who had become a literary agent in New York. Richard was everything. Tom wasn't. Slick, ambitious, loud, with a cynically commercial view of literature. He represented authors who wrote blockbuster thrillers and splashy celebrity memoirs. His world and my quiet literary world could not have been further apart. They had remained friends out of a sense of history, and Richard would visit us in Chicago once or twice a year. During one of these visits, we were all out to dinner. Tom, glowing with a proud, husbandly pride that now turns my stomach to remember, started talking to Richard about my novel. "Maya is a genius, Rich," Tom said, his voice full of genuine conviction. "She's been working on this book for 5 years. It's a masterpiece, a modern Faulkner." Richard, ever the agent, perked up. "Oh, yeah. What's it about?" I gave a brief, vague summary, feeling deeply uncomfortable. My book felt like a secret creature that would die if exposed to direct sunlight, especially the harsh commercial light of a man like Richard. "Sounds interesting," Richard said, a professional gleam in his eye. "You should let me take a look at it. I could give you some notes from an industry perspective. See if it has legs." I offered a polite but firm smile. The answer was an immediate, visceral no. "That's very kind of you, Richard, but it's nowhere near ready," I said. "It's still my secret. It's not ready for anyone else to see." Tom looked a little disappointed, but he squeezed my hand under the table. I thought he understood. I thought that was the end of it. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, I received an email. The sender was Richard Kent of Kent Literary Agency. The subject line was simply, "Your novel." My heart went cold. A sense of dread, so profound and so specific it felt like a premonition, washed over me. I opened it. "Maya," the email began, "Tom sent me your manuscript." I have to be honest, I was skeptical when he described it, but this is extraordinary. It's raw, it's powerful, and it's a story that needs to be told. The writing is literary, yes, but the family saga at its core is incredibly commercial. It needs a lot of work from a structural standpoint. The pacing is slow. The ending is too ambiguous for the market, but the raw talent is undeniable. I took the liberty of speaking to a senior editor at a major publishing house who is a personal friend of mine. I described the story to her, and she is very, very interested. She wants to see a proposal and the first 3 chapters by the end of the month. This is your shot, Maya. Don't blow it. I read the email 3 times. My mind refused to process the words. It was like reading a language I didn't know. But one sentence kept rising to the surface, clear and brutal. "Tom sent me your manuscript." The sentence echoed in the silent room. It felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. He had taken the key I had given him, the key to the most private, sacred room in my soul, and he had unlocked the door. He hadn't just invited a stranger inside. He had invited a real estate developer inside to appraise its commercial value and suggest renovations. When Tom came home that evening, whistling, holding a bag of groceries, I was sitting at the kitchen table. My laptop was open to the email. I didn't have to say a word. He saw the look on my face, glanced at the screen, and he knew. His immediate reaction was not shame. It was a boyish, misguided excitement, a complete and terrifying misreading of the emotional cataclysm that had just occurred. "You saw the email. Isn't it incredible?" he said, a huge, proud grin spreading across his face. "I know you. We're too modest, too afraid to send it yourself, Maya. You're always so critical of your own talent. I just wanted to help you. I wanted to give you the push you needed. I couldn't let you hide your light under a bushel forever. He thinks it could be huge. This is everything we've ever dreamed of. This is everything we've ever dreamed of." I just stared at him, a great silent chasm opening up between us on the cold kitchen floor. He wasn't listening. He didn't see the violation. He only saw the potential outcome, the success, the validation from the outside world he seemed to crave on my behalf. "That wasn't your dream." "To share, Tom," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, a tremor running through my entire body. "That wasn't a product to be shopped around. That was my soul. That was my family's pain. That was my secret. And you gave it to a stranger without asking me." The smile finally faded from his face as the reality of my devastation began to dawn on him. His expression shifted to one of pure confusion. "But I did it for you. I did it for us. I love you. I believe in you. I thought this was what you wanted deep down." "What I wanted," I said, standing up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor, "was to trust my husband. I wanted to know that the one person on earth who held my most fragile, unfinished thoughts would keep them safe." "You didn't just send him a book, Tom. You sent him me. My unfinished, unready, unprotected self. And you did it behind my back. That was the night our marriage died. It didn't have a funeral. It just lay there between us, a cold and silent casualty of his well-intentioned betrayal. The trust, the central pillar of our life, had crumbled into dust, and the entire structure came crashing down in a slow, agonizing collapse. I couldn't write anymore. The act of creation, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. Every time I sat down at my desk, I felt exposed, violated. The words wouldn't come. The joy was gone, replaced by a paralyzing sense of shame and fear. The thought of Tom's friend, of some faceless editor in New York, dissecting my personal history, my family's pain, made me feel physically ill. Tom's act, born of what he insisted was love, had killed my creative spirit. It had poisoned the well from which I drew my entire identity. He apologized. Oh, God, did he apologize? Over and over. He cried. He begged. He brought me flowers. He wrote me long, pleading letters. His remorse was profound, and I believe completely sincere. He finally understood the magnitude of his betrayal. But it didn't matter. An apology can't unbreak a priceless vase. It can't unshare a secret. It can't rebuild a sanctuary after it has been desecrated. We separated a year later. The silence in my new small apartment was a living entity. I was surrounded by the wreckage of my life, my unfinished novel a dead weight on my hard drive, a monument to my broken trust. And at the center of it all was the question that haunted my every waking moment. Can I ever forgive him? The question became a labyrinth I couldn't escape. My friends, my family, my therapist, they all offered the same well-meaning advice. Forgiveness isn't for him, Maya, they'd say. It's for you. It's the only way to let go of the anger and the resentment that are eating you alive. I knew they were right on an intellectual level, but in my heart it felt impossible. How do you forgive a betrayal so fundamental it changes the landscape of your soul? I thought forgiveness meant absolution, wiping the slate clean, saying, "It's okay," but it wasn't okay. What he did was a profound violation of my trust and my spirit. I couldn't just erase it. For months, I wrestled with it. The anger I felt was a poison, but it also felt like the only thing holding me together. It was a shield. To let it go felt like letting him off the hook, like saying what he did didn't ultimately matter. The breakthrough, the thread that finally led me out of the labyrinth, came from an unexpected place. I was at the Art Institute one afternoon, wandering aimlessly, and I found myself in the Japanese art section. I was standing in front of a display of kintsugi, the ancient art of repairing broken pottery. The philosophy behind it is that a piece is more beautiful for having been broken. The cracks are not something to be hidden. They are treated as part of the object's history. They are mended with a lacquer mixed with powdered gold, silver, or platinum, making the breaks a beautiful, illuminated part of the design. Staring at those beautiful broken bowls, their golden seams glowing under the gallery lights, something shifted in me. I had been trying to pretend my vase wasn't shattered. I had been trying to find a magical glue that would make it look perfect again, but that was impossible. The cracks were there forever. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing the cracks. It wasn't about saying the break never happened. It was about accepting the break. It was about acknowledging the profound damage, the deep and lasting hurt, and choosing not to let the anger be the gold that filled the cracks. It was about choosing to mend myself with something better. That night, I went home and I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I sat down at my desk, opened a new document on my laptop, and I started to write. I didn't open the old manuscript. That story was a part of a past I couldn't return to. It belonged to a different woman. I started something new. A story about a woman who learns to rebuild a life from the ruins of a betrayal. A story about trust and art and the quiet, difficult, and ultimately beautiful process of mending one's own heart. The words came slowly at first, then with a steady, liberating flow. I was not just writing. I was performing my own kintsugi, filling the cracks in my soul with words that were honest and true. A month later, I sent Tom one final email. It was the last one I would ever write him. It was short. Tom, I have received all of your apologies. I believe they are sincere. I also want you to know that the hurt your actions caused was real, and it was profound, and it is a part of my story now. I am not writing this to absolve you, and I am not writing to reconcile. I am writing to let you go. I am choosing to release the anger and the resentment, not because you deserve it, but because I do. I am choosing to be at peace. I wish you well. I hit send, and I felt a sense of quiet final release. I had not erased the past. I had not forgotten the betrayal. I had simply decided that he would no longer be the protagonist in the story of my pain. My new novel is coming out next spring. It's a story about a woman who discovers that the greatest trust you can have is in your own ability to heal. Forgiveness, I have finally learned, is not a gift you give to someone else after they have broken you. It is the patient, sacred, and powerful work of putting your own pieces back together, not pretending the cracks aren't there, but making them beautiful, making them strong, making them shine with a light that is all your own, of course. A story about finding personal closure is often followed by the unexpected challenge of how that closure interacts with the outside world. Here is a continuation of Maya's story, exploring the aftermath of her healing and the new life of her art. The final email I sent to Tom was a quiet personal act of liberation. It was a line drawn in the sand of my own soul, a declaration that my healing would no longer be contingent on his actions or his remorse. I believed in that moment that the story was over. I had found my own version of forgiveness and acceptance of the past, a release of the anger, and had begun the sacred work of mending myself. I had started my new novel, and in the act of writing, I was slowly, painstakingly, filling the cracks of my broken trust with the gold of my own words. But stories, I've learned, rarely end where we think they do. Sometimes, the most private resolutions are forced to face a public reckoning. My new novel, the one born from the ashes of the old one, was titled The Golden Seam. It was a quiet, intense story about a woman rebuilding her life after a devastating betrayal, using her art to make sense of the ruins. It was my story, of course, but fictionalized, universalized. I sent it out to a small literary press under a pseudonym, wanting the work to be judged on its own merits, free from the baggage of my personal history. To my astonishment, they acquired it. The year leading up to its publication was a blur of meticulous, joyful work. For the first time, I was engaged in a healthy creative partnership, this time with a brilliant and respectful editor named Eleanor, a strange cosmic irony not lost on me. She championed the book, she understood its heart, and every suggestion she made was aimed at making the story stronger, not at changing its soul to make it more commercial. When the first advance copies arrived at my door, a stack of beautiful books with my real name on the cover, I cried. Not with sadness, but with a sense of profound, cathartic triumph. I had taken the ugliest chapter of my life and transformed it into a beautiful object. The Golden Seam was not a blockbuster. It was a quiet book that found its audience slowly. It was passed from friend to friend, championed by independent booksellers, and slowly it began to gather a dedicated following. The reviews were startlingly insightful. Critics praised its raw honesty, its nuanced exploration of trust and creativity. They called it a masterclass in the art of healing. And then, about 6 months after its release, a feature article appeared in a major literary journal. The writer had done a deep dive into the book's themes and had, through some clever deduction, and anonymous sources from the publishing world, pieced together the likely autobiographical nature of the story. The article was titled "The Betrayal of the Muse," and it painted a thinly veiled portrait of a loving husband and creative champion who had committed an unforgivable act of artistic treachery. It didn't name Tom, but for anyone who knew our story, it was unmistakable. The article went viral in literary circles. My quiet novel was suddenly the subject of intense discussion. My story, my private, hard-won piece, had become a public narrative, and that's when the email arrived. It was from Tom. It had been 3 years since my final dismissive email to him. Seeing his name in my inbox again was like discovering a fossil in my garden, a relic from a long-extinct world. My first instinct was to delete it unread, but a stronger, more resilient curiosity took over. I was no longer the woman who was afraid of his words. I opened it. "Maya," it read. "I see your book is a success. I'm not surprised. I always knew you were a brilliant writer. I am truly happy for you. But I have to be honest, reading about myself, or a version of myself, in these articles, it's been difficult. I know I have no right to ask for your sympathy. I know I deserve this. But I guess I had hoped that my apology, that my own journey of accountability meant something. To see our private pain, the mistake I will regret for the rest of my life, turned into a public spectacle. It feels like a new kind of punishment. I suppose I just wanted to ask, was my apology not enough to grant me the grace of your silence? I read the email, and I felt not anger, but a deep, weary sigh in my soul. There it was again, the subtle, masterful pivot. He wasn't yelling or demanding. He was hurt. He was wounded. He was framing my success as a new cruelty I was inflicting upon him. He was once again making his feelings the center of a story that was no longer about him. Old me would have been thrown into a spiral of guilt. Am I being unfair? Am I exploiting our story for my own gain? Do I owe him my silence? But the woman who read that email was not the same woman who had lived through the betrayal. I did not owe him my silence. My story was mine. My pain was mine. My healing was mine. The work I had done to transform that pain into art was mine. His actions were the catalyst, but the narrative of survival belonged to me, and I had a right to tell it. The idea that his apology, an act he undertook for his own healing, should come with the condition of my eternal silence was the last, most audacious power play of a man who still, on some level, believed he had a right to control the story. Email presented a new, more complex question. Not, can I forgive him, but what do I owe the person who hurt me once I have? Do they have a right to privacy regarding the very actions that shaped who I have become? A few weeks later, I was invited to a major literary festival for a panel discussion on writing from trauma. During the Q&A, a young woman in the audience stood up. "Your book," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It feels so incredibly real. It helped me make sense of a betrayal in my own life. But I have to ask, How do you tell your own story when it is so deeply intertwined with someone else's? How do you do it without feeling like it's an act of revenge? The entire room was silent. I could feel the weight of her question, the question that Tom's email had forced me to confront. I looked out at her and I saw a reflection of myself. I took a deep breath. That is a beautiful and important question, I began. And the answer for me was in discovering the difference between motive and purpose. An act of revenge is centered on the person who hurt you. Its purpose is to inflict pain. But an act of healing is centered on yourself. Its purpose is to create meaning. When I started writing again, my purpose was not to expose a man. It was to save a woman myself. I continued, finding my voice, my own truth solidifying as I spoke. The events in our lives are just data points. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss, those are real. But the story belongs to the person who survives it. The story is in the telling. And when we tell our stories, when we turn our private pain into public art, we're not seeking revenge. We are seeking resonance. We are saying to the world and to anyone else who might be sitting in the darkness, you are not alone. The story is no longer about the person who broke the vase. It's about the person who learned to put the pieces back together with gold. And that part of the story, the part about the healing, is mine and mine alone to tell. There was a quiet, profound applause from the audience. After the panel, the young woman who had asked the question came up to me. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You've given me the courage to write my own story. I never replied to Tom's email. There was no need. My answer was delivered on that stage. My answer is in every copy of my book that sits on a shelf. My life, like my art, is no longer a secret walled-off garden. It is a beacon, and the light it casts is not meant to expose the darkness of my past, but to illuminate a path for others who are still finding their way out. The betrayal nearly cost me my voice, but in the end, it gave me a story to tell that was far more important than the one I was writing before. It gave me a story that wasn't just mine, but belongs now to anyone who needs to hear it. And that is a form of forgiveness and a purpose I could never have imagined.